A man once paid gold to stop a cruelty. Not to own a woman, not to save his own skin. To end something that the whole town of Tucson already knew about and chose not to see. But the worst part was not the gold on the table. It was the list of names hidden under Elias Varn's hand. And one of those names was about to tear Wade Rourke's past wide open. The summer of 1872 sat heavy on Arizona territory. The air smelled of dust and dried leather, and things left to rot in the heat. A year had passed since the massacre at Camp Grant, where more than 100 Apache people, most of them women and children, were killed before sunrise by a mob that rode out in darkness and came back before breakfast. The government called it a tragedy. Too many in Tucson treated it like old news before the blood had even dried. Inside a trading tent at the edge of town, Elias Varn sat behind a long wooden table. He was not a soldier. He was not a lawman. He was a horse trader and a paper man, and he had learned early that the most profitable thing a man could sell in Arizona territory was not horses at all. It was children. Apache children, taken from Aravaipa Creek after Camp Grant, stripped of their names, handed over to white families under documents he called guardianship papers. Some were kept in town as servants. Some were moved south along the Santa Cruz Valley toward the Sonora line, where names changed, papers vanished, and nobody asked questions. By the time a child's name entered Varn's book, that child had already begun disappearing from the world that made them human. On this particular morning, a young Apache woman stood across the table from him. Her name was Naya Ash-Creek. She was 24 years old. Her husband was dead, killed in a raid she had survived by hiding in a dry creek bed for a day and a night, licking mud from the stones when thirst got bad enough. She had come to Tucson for one reason. Her younger brother had been taken from Aravaipa after Camp Grant, and a man who owed her a favor had told her the boy was somewhere in Elias Varn's ledger. Elias looked at her the way he looked at everything he intended to profit from. He told her she owed a debt: food, transport, protection. He called her a widow under debt. He said if no one settled the account, she would be placed with a household in town. Naya did not beg. She looked past him at the ledger on the table and read one line that stopped her cold. A boy, left ear scar, renamed Nathan. Her face did not change, but something inside her went still. The kind of stillness that comes before a scream, or before a knife leaves its sheath. That was when Wade Rourke walked through the tent flap. He was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, going gray in the beard. His yellow bandana was stiff with trail dust. His silver belly hat was pulled low. He set a heavy canvas bag on the table, and the coins inside rang against the wood. Every man in that tent assumed the same thing. They were wrong. What kind of man pays gold not to buy someone, but to destroy the machinery that was selling them? And what was it going to cost him before this was over? Wade Rourke had a reputation in Tucson, and like most reputations in Arizona territory, it was only partly true. The lie in that reputation had kept him alive. The truth in it had kept him awake. The part that was true: 7 years before that summer, he had pulled a freight wagon out of the Sonoran desert near San Pedro River when the driver had gone blind from sun and the two men riding alongside were too weak to stand. Wade had given them his water, lashed the team himself, and walked beside the wheels for 11 miles until they reached shade. People remembered that. People in Tucson liked to remember the things that made the territory feel redeemable. The part they did not talk about: the spring of 1871, when the killing at Camp Grant was still fresh and the dust on the road to Aravaipa had not yet settled. Wade had been hauling supply crates south when he saw the wagon. It was moving fast, loaded with children. Apache children, small and silent, some of them wrapped in blankets despite the heat. A man Wade recognized as one of Elias Varne's associates was driving. Wade pulled his rig to the side of the road. He watched the wagon pass. He counted the children the way a man counts things he does not want to be responsible for. Then he clicked his team forward and kept moving. He told himself it was not his business. He told himself those children were being taken somewhere better. He told himself the trouble was already done, and one freight hauler with a wagon full of dry goods was not going to change what the whole territory had decided to look away from. He was 51 years old now, and he had not believed a single one of those things since the day he said them. A man can outride a posse, a dust storm, even a bad name, but he cannot outride the face of a child he chose not to save. Wade lived alone out past the San Pedro Valley. He drank less than most men assumed and worked harder than anyone knew. He kept to himself, not because he was unfriendly, but because solitude was the only place where he did not have to explain why he looked the way he looked when children were mentioned in conversation. When he walked into Elias Varne's tent that morning and saw the ledger open on the table, saw the names crossed out and replaced, saw the descriptions of scars and ages and transfer routes written in that flat accountant's hand, something that had been sitting behind his sternum for a year finally cracked open. He had looked away once. He had been paying for it every night since. This morning he intended to start paying a different way. Naya Ash-Creek did not thank him. She watched Wade collect the debt papers from Elias Varne's stiff, reluctant hands, watched him tuck the folded pages into his coat, and she felt nothing that resembled gratitude. She had seen enough white men spend money in front of Apache people to know that gold on a table was not generosity. It was authority wearing a different coat. When Wade turned and offered her the papers, she did not take them immediately. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at men who believed their intentions excused their methods. Then she spoke. "Gold does not make cruelty clean." Wade did not argue. He did not explain himself or soften his expression or reach for another word. He set the papers on the edge of the table where she could take them or leave them, and he told her she was free to walk out of that tent and never see him again. Then he told her about the children. Elias Varne was moving 3 of them before sunrise. The route ran southwest through the Santa Cruz Valley, a trail Wade knew from years of hauling freight. A trail where the relay stations were half a day apart, and the men running them did not ask questions about cargo. One of the 3 children matched the ledger entry she had read. Boy. Left ear scar. Renamed Nathan. Naya was quiet for a long moment. She knew things Wade did not know. She could read the ground the way most men read a page. She knew the small signs Apache children left when they were moved against their will. Marks pressed into soft dirt. Beads dropped at intervals. A way of bending a branch that meant someone passed here, afraid. She had been following those signs for 3 weeks before Tucson. Wade knew things Naya could not know. The relay points, the water stops, the timing of the supply runs that gave cover to Varne's transfers, the name of the deputy who looked the other way for a fixed monthly sum. Neither of them could finish this alone. That did not make them partners. Not yet. It only made them 2 wounded people tied to the same terrible road. They rode out before the tent had fully emptied behind them. They did not speak much in the first hour. The desert opened up flat and pale around them, the kind of landscape that strips a man down to whatever he actually is. Somewhere in the second hour, Wade said it without looking at her. "I was late once. I've been late every night since." Naya did not respond, but she did not ride ahead either. If that line stayed with you, stay close. Some stories do not turn on a gunshot. They turn on the moment one tired man finally understands that looking away has a price too. and Wade Rourke was about to learn just how much that price could rise. They found the relay station 2 hours before noon, a low adobe structure set back from the Santa Cruz Road with a brush corral on the south side and a canvas shade stretched between two posts where the horses stood sweating in the heat. It looked like every other stop on that route. It was not. Places like that did not need bars on the windows to be prisons. Sometimes all a prison needed was distance, heat, and men willing to call children cargo. Wade had been here before, years back, swapping a lame horse for a sound one on a freight run down toward Tucson in the old Sonora road. He remembered the man who ran it, a thick-necked former soldier named Cord, who kept a dog, a shotgun, and very few opinions. Cord was not there now. The two men sitting outside the corral gate were younger, harder looking, and neither one of them belonged to the freight business. Wade told Naya to come in from the east side on foot while he rode straight up the center road. He did not make it sound like a suggestion. He rode in slow, his hat pulled low, one hand on the reins and the other hanging loose at his side. He told the men he was looking to water his horse. One of them stood up. The other stayed seated and watched Wade's hands. It went bad quickly, the way things do when everyone in a situation already knows what the situation is. There was no heroic warning, no clean challenge, no fair count to 3, just leather moving, fingers dropping toward guns, and the sudden knowledge that someone was going to bleed before anyone spoke another full sentence. The standing man reached for his belt, and Wade swung down off the saddle and used the horse's momentum and his own considerable weight to drive the man sideways into the corral gate. The latch buckled. The horses inside pushed through, and the sudden noise and movement pulled the second man's attention for just long enough. Wade was not fast. He never had been. But he had been in enough tight spaces to know that speed mattered less than positioning, and he had positioned himself well. He caught the second man with the butt of his rifle across the forearm before the pistol cleared leather. From inside the station came the sudden scrape of a chair, then the sharp smell of smoke. One of Varn's men had kicked open the little stove and shoved a packet of papers into the coals. Inside the station, Naya had already moved. She had come through the east wall where the canvas hung loose from a broken post, and she had found them in the back room. 3 children sitting against the far wall with their wrists bound with rope. A heavy-set man in a deputy's vest stood between her and them. He was bigger than her by a considerable measure, and he made the mistake of assuming that settled things. It did not settle things. Naya put her shoulder into him before he finished turning around, drove him into the low shelf on the back wall, and when he came up swinging, she stepped inside his arm and used the length of rope she had cut from the nearest child's wrists to loop his hands to the shelf post. It took less than a minute, and it was not clean. Her ribs hit the shelf hard enough to steal her breath, but she had been thinking about this room, or a room very much like it, for 3 weeks. She cut the other children loose, and that was when she saw him. The smallest one. A boy sitting with his knees pulled to his chest, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the wall. His left ear carried a pale, raised scar along the outer ridge, the kind that comes from a blade pulled quickly across skin. Someone had cut his hair short and dressed him in a cotton shirt 2 sizes too large, and somewhere between Aravaipa Creek and this room, they had told him his name was Nathan. Naya crouched in front of him and said his name. His real name. The one their mother had given him. The boy looked at her. There was recognition somewhere behind his eyes, faint and far away, like light seen through dirty water. That faint look hurt worse than hatred would have. Hatred would have meant he remembered. This was emptier than that. He did not come to her immediately. He had been away too long, and the people who took him had been thorough. That was the thing about what Elias Varn did that no ledger entry could fully capture. He did not just move children from one place to another. He moved them away from themselves. Wade wanted to ride south and disappear with the children into the desert. Naya told him that was the wrong answer. She had thought about this too. A white man and an Apache woman moving 3 Apache children through Arizona territory without papers was not escape. It was a fresh crime waiting to be named. Elias Varn had the law in his pocket and the language of guardianship on his side, and if they ran, he would simply send word ahead and they would be stopped before they reached the next water. The only place Elias could not control the story was in front of enough people to make the story impossible to bury. It was a cruel kind of gamble. If the crowd turned against them, Wade would hang as a thief, Naya would be taken, and the children would vanish a second time. They rode back to Tucson. Wade carried the half-burned ledger inside his coat, the pages he had dragged from the stove at the relay station before Cord's replacement could burn them clean through. Elias had sent a rider ahead. By the time they came down the main road with the 3 children, there were already men gathered outside the trading post, and Elias Varn was standing among them with the practiced expression of a man who had been wronged. He called Wade a thief. He called Naya a danger to the children she was holding. He held up his guardianship papers and explained to the gathered crowd that these children had been legally placed in the care of respectable families in town, and that what they were witnessing was a kidnapping. A few men in the crowd nodded. Some of them had signed those papers. Some of them had children in their homes right now whose real names they had never asked about. Wade let Elias finish. Then he walked to the nearest flat surface, a crate outside the trading post door, and he laid the burned ledger open on top of it. His hands were steady, but his mouth had gone dry. A gunfight was simple compared to this. Bullets only asked whether a man could stand. Truth asked whether he could be hated and keep speaking. He did not make a speech. He pointed at the pages, and he read from them. Names crossed out. Names written over. Descriptions of scars, ages, transfer dates, amounts paid, routes taken. He read until the crowd stopped murmuring and went quiet in the way that crowds go quiet when they can no longer pretend not to understand what they are hearing. Then he said the thing that cost him the most to say. He told them he had seen a wagon on the road to Aravaipa in the spring of 1871. He told them what was in it. He told them he had kept moving. No one in that crowd wanted to hear it, because every word made the silence of other men heavier too. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in Tucson that morning. A woman near the back of the crowd said she had seen Apache children kept in a house 2 streets over. A freight driver looked at the ground and said he had moved children on the Santa Cruz route twice and had not asked who they belonged to. Elias Varn pulled his pistol. He aimed it at Wade, which was a mistake, because it told everyone watching exactly what kind of man he was and exactly what he was afraid of. Wade took the shot across his left shoulder and drove into Elias with everything he had left, which was enough to put them both into the crate and onto the ground. Naya picked up the pistol that skidded across the dirt. She did not shoot Elias Varn in the chest. She shot him through the forearm, the one still reaching for a knife at his belt. And she did it with the calm of someone who had already decided that a dead man answers no questions. Elias answered questions for a long time after that. But answers did not put every child back beside a cooking fire. Answers did not return old names to every mouth. They only opened doors that should never have been locked in the first place. 2 of the 3 children were reunited with surviving family near Aravaipa Creek before the month was out. Naya's brother took longer. The boy, who had been called Nathan for nearly a year, did not speak his real name again for months, but he spoke it eventually, quietly, to his sister, on a morning when the desert was still cool and the light came in low and gold across the canyon walls. The ledger, what remained of it, listed 21 children tied to the Camp Grant aftermath. 7 were found. The rest were not. Wade's shoulder healed badly, and he never had full strength in that arm again. He did not go back to freighting. He stayed in the territory, and he kept asking questions about the names in that ledger, one at a time, for years. Naya found him on the road once, 2 summers later, and she said 2 words to him. "You came late." Wade looked at her for a moment, and he said the only thing that was true. "Then I'll spend what's left of me catching up." He had paid with gold to stop one cruelty. What he had not understood, standing in that tent with the coins still ringing on the table, was that gold was the easy part. The rest of it, the years of it, the weight of every name still missing from that ledger, that was a debt that did not have a bottom. Years later, men in Tucson still remember the day Wade Rourke put gold on a table. Naya remembered something else. She remembered that he finally put his name beside the truth when it could still cost him something. Some men spend their whole lives looking away. Wade Rourke spent the second half of his looking back. Whether that was enough is a question only the missing children could have answered, and most of them were never found. If this story stayed with you, do not let it vanish the way those names almost did. There are more stories buried under dust, silence, and old paper. Stay with this channel, and we will keep bringing them back into the light. That burned ledger Wade Rourke laid on the table is the part I cannot shake. Not the gunshot, not the gold, the ledger. Because a gun at least tells the truth about itself. It comes loud, ugly, and honest. But paper? Paper can smile at you. Paper can wear a government seal, call itself guardianship, and still be nothing more than a chain around a child's throat. After the Camp Grant Massacre on April 30th, 1871, the killing did not end when the shooting stopped. In 1872, American diplomatic records reported 29 Apache children taken from that camp. 2 escaped. 6 were returned. 21 were said to be down in Sonora, Mexico, held in bondage. Later accounts still put the number close to 27 or 30 children. Now, I do not care how pretty a man makes the paperwork. When children are stripped of their names, sold into houses, carried across borders, and made to forget who they came from, that ain't law. That is evil with ink on its fingers. That is why Wade's shame matters in this story. He was not clean. He looked away once. A lot of men did. Tucson was full of men who knew enough to feel guilty and stayed quiet anyway. But one day, Wade stopped hiding behind silence. He put his name beside the truth when it could still cost him blood. And that is the part worth remembering. Because history is not only made by monsters. Sometimes it is made worse by decent men who keep walking. So I will ask you this. When a child's name is crossed out of the ledger, who is guilty? The man holding the pen? Or every man who saw it happen and said nothing?